I grew up in fundamentalist Christianity. And in my opinion, there are many Christian theological beliefs that rank in the hierarchy of least harmful to God. I can't believe I believed in this. This is borderline abuse. Biblical marriage, I would say, would be the worst or second worst. If you don't know what biblical marriage is, it's take a regular secular marriage and then a biblical marriage, the partner roles, the expectations, the relationship are joined between two people, heterosexual, obviously, and they're based on a second relationship with a deity, preferably the God from the Bible. It's like a triangle. God's at the top, man and a woman are at the bottom. But the problem is, in biblical marriage, the wife and husband are not equal. They don't make decisions together. They discuss it together. But the final decision, the authority, and the person who has the most authority, power, and respect would be the man, obviously. Because Christianity is a patriarchal, archaic view of relationships. Biblical marriage is one of the biggest theological frauds that exists on this planet. I cannot think of any concept that has caused more damage, more death, more abuse, and more cover-ups of every form of felony imaginable compared to biblical marriage. If you do a simple search on YouTube, women who have escaped biblical marriage or a religious marriage, you will find domestic violence, marital rape, every form of violence perpetrated by cis heterosexual men on women imaginable. Everything from financial abuse to refusing to allow women the ability to work, isolation, gaslighting. Biblical marriage is a biblical version of, if you've ever seen the show You, the relationships Joe has with his girls, that is biblical marriage, but a secular kind of biblical marriage. Women are deemed the property of men. Women are not allowed autonomy. They're not allowed to think for themselves. And men and women are equal. They just have different roles. That sounds a lot like Animal Farm. All animals are equal, but some are more equal than others. Relationships need equality. Unfortunately, biblical marriage is set up on several beliefs that hinge on the idea that women are inferior to men, that women are the result of the fall, and that anything women do to try to gain equality or maintain healthy boundaries and gender equality is seen as rebellion against God. I grew up Baptist, and the idea that men and women are equal and that they should both have an equal partnership violates every law of the Bible. Because women in the Bible were not allowed to have positions of authority unless it was the absence of a man. And it was pretty clear that God was disciplining anyone who had a female leader. This is misogyny. Biblical marriage is inherently sexist. Because all of the beliefs of biblical marriage hinges on the idea that women are inferior, women are poorly formed men. You look at many of the ancient leaders and biblical scholars like St. Augustine. viewed women as a deformed man. They viewed women, their bodies, and anything women brought to the table for any discussions, relationships, or just existing was an inherent problem. Imagine growing up in an environment that taught women that men were created to rule over you because you have the brain capacity, wisdom, and safety of a child. Christianity does not view women as anything but an inferior free labor source that they can exploit. Any woman with the basics of human decency, compassion, and equality, no man with those traits would want anything to do with the way women are treated in biblical marriage. Biblical marriage is the reason why a lot of women return to abusive Christian marriages. And it doesn't even have to be a physical violence, even though that's terrible. Some of the worst stories I have ever heard is financial abuse. The concept that men are the financial providers and women must ask men for money creates a power imbalance. If a husband and wife, or whatever romantic relationship you have, which, unless you're heterosexual, will never be seen as a viable, valuable, or in the same, or viewed with the same respect if it's not heterosexual, which is just terrible. But that's the way biblical marriage works. Biblical marriage is a rampant breeding ground for every form of abuse we have a word for. I am shocked if abuse does not happen. I mean, you just won the lottery because you've been playing Russian roulette. Biblical marriage is like sitting in a room with a gun and nobody chooses to pick it up and fire it. That is how rampant abuse is within this dynamic. And even if everyone viewed each other as equal, you're still not equal. Because if you believe in a religion, a theology that sees women as the reason for the fall, you're not equal. Christianity, their doctrine, I mean, if you Google biblical passages in the Bible, there is no way that men who believe in Christianity are going to view women as anything but inferior. You look at Apostle Paul's writings. He emphatically states that women should not be in charge. That women should be controlled, silent, quiet, and basically don't have a pulse. It's so rampant. I remember at least once in every book written by the Apostle Paul has something to say about why the world would be better without women in it. And women have inherent value, not because they have wombs, the ability to have kids, or because they're basically a whole. They have value because they're human beings. Even if a woman doesn't do anything to a man, doesn't give men anything, she has inherent value. Men shouldn't protect women because they can provide things for men, but because she's a human being. Women have inherent rights, bodily autonomy, the ability to move freely, the expectation that she won't be hurt, imprisoned, tortured, killed, assaulted. Women do not need men for anything. The same reason men don't need women for anything. Women are not less than. Women are not the opposite of whole because they don't have a man. Women should have their own identities, their own name, their own lives outside of what a man gives them. If your identity is just a wife and a mother, your identity is wrapped up in what men are getting from you. If you're a heterosexual woman in a biblical marriage scenario. There's a reason why the least sexually satisfied group of orientation are cis heterosexual women. They are least likely to enjoy life, feel satiated if they're into sex because of the biblical marriage expectations. And I'm not saying everybody doesn't have a great sex life in biblical marriage. I'm honestly shocked you beat the odds. Because biblical marriage is like playing Russian roulette with a loaded gun on the table. And the chances, the insidious way women are treated in these religions and circumstances, I'm shocked nobody ever took advantage of male advantage. Biblical marriage creates an environment where women are trapped and at the mercy of how good or bad the man she was basically talked into wanting. Because in biblical marriage, women are nothing if they're single. Women can do nothing in church of any hierarchy if she's not married. Do you think a pastor's wife would have any of the respect she has if she wasn't married to a pastor or a deacon? No. Women who don't marry have no authority in the church. Well, they technically don't when they are married either. But a pastor's wife has the most respect of any woman. You're not even treated like a human being if you're not married and over the age of, I would say, 30. That's just the way it is. It's terrible. I don't see them ever fixing it any time ever. That's one reason I left church when I was 24. There was nothing for women in their mid-20s past being a college-age person. If you're over 22, no longer in college, and you're not married, you're either a single or you're nothing. And, I mean, and it's that way in a lot of churches, especially in Southern Baptist churches. You are nothing as a woman without the protection and identity of a man. This is dehumanizing. This is basically how children are treated. And in Christianity, if you are a woman, you never grow out of the view, the treatment, and the expectations that a little girl has. Little girls, they don't have autonomy. Probably not in any Baptist church. Women, regardless of their age, are seen as inferior. Girls are viewed as what they can provide for men. It shouldn't be that way, but that's biblical marriage to a T. That's why people like Anna Duggar can't divorce their pedophile husband. Regardless of what a man does, you have to forgive him. You are trapped with him for life. You only live once. If the person you're married to isn't somebody you would want around your kids and they're a consistent liar, life is better without them. When you view marriage as though it's sacred, what happens when it ceases to be sacred? What if the person you're married to hurts you, is a danger to your safety, or basically creates a situation where your central nervous system can never relax or shut down. When you view marriage, biblical marriage especially, as sacred, there's no room for you to decide that it's not healthy for you anymore. They do not respect divorced people in Baptist churches. In my opinion, viewing divorce as a failure kills women. If you grow up in an environment that treats divorce as bad as being a thief, you're not teaching women to protect themselves. Because when women are treated as though they're a harlot for being divorced, especially if she escaped a violent situation, you're not encouraging women to protect themselves, their kids, and their mental health. There is no bad reason to get divorced. Even if you have a family and you're unhappy, you can get divorced and still provide for your kids. Do not stay in a marriage you are unhappy with. Because the person that makes you unhappy could find somebody that could make them happier. The most selfless thing is to let someone leave, or to allow somebody to find somebody that would be the right person for them. In my opinion, it's selfish to stay in a marriage that's unfulfilling because it benefits you, but it hurts other people. And when you grow up in an environment that treats women with disdain for protecting their body, their mental health, and their kids by forcing, expecting, and throwing women out because they refuse to forgive a predator they're married to, your biblical marriage is a fraud. Well, biblical marriage is a fraud at the very beginning. Any biblical, religious, or cultural institution that makes it harder for women in danger, maybe they're unhappy, or they're just tired of doing more than their share, they've given up. Anything that prohibits a woman from living her best life needs to be torn down, destroyed, exposed, and abandoned. No sacred marriage is more important than the people's health, sanity, and happiness. Nothing. My mother used to counsel women as just a mere friend. She would counsel women who were cis, heterosexual in Baptist churches. The stories I would hear about how these women were treated by what the church deemed morally successful, respected men is one of the 3 reasons why I'm single at 32. The word I would use is placeholder. The way these white men of privilege treated their wives is abhorrent. And the sad thing about biblical marriage is, when I remember all the times these women in our church would talk to my mom, who had been married at that time about 35 years, which is rather long. I mean, the average woman in our church had been married anywhere from 5 to 15 years. They were in their 30s, maybe 40s. They weren't women who had a lot of experience with marriage. My mom had over 30 years experience. So she had about twice the experience that most women had. So they would go to her for advice. Now, my mom's not a counselor. She's not a therapist or anything like that. But they wanted her advice because she just had the experience and they just wanted her advice. The things I would hear them talk about, I'll give you a few examples. Finding out your husband she was 37, white, cis, heterosexual. All the components of not having most likely a happy, successful marriage, because you know what I'm talking about. She found out her husband had a mistress, a second house, and a child with another woman. Several others, one lady, especially at the last church I remember going to, well, the second to last, she found out her husband had over a dozen affairs in 5 years, and that he had brought the woman to, what's the nice way of putting it, their house, to their bed. And it's not funny, but oh goodness. Finding out the level of depravity that cis heterosexual men of religious background is capable of is terrible. One of them, she found out her husband had been having an affair since before they got married, which was about 12 years long. Turned out he had 5 women, and her husband, they became separated. The church wanted her to forgive him. And when I say wanted, I mean they expected, demanded, required, which it's not good. And they wanted her to do what therapists would call restorative rape, which is the forced forgiveness, reconciliation, and forgetting of what a predator has done. She refused. She did not want to reconcile. She did not want to go to counseling with him. She said the marriage was over. And this was before she found out a few other things that was really, really bad. Turned out he had touched one of their neighbor kids under the age of 10. Even then, even when that news came out, they pressured, coerced, basically ostracized her from the church because she would not forgive. Requiring women to stay in marriage because it's a sacred example of the church and Jesus is not doing women any favors. You don't need a reason to leave. You really don't. That's why they call it no-fault divorce. If you don't want to be somewhere, you do not have to have a reason. You just leave. And I would counsel people not to tell your spouse you're leaving. Ever. Do not ever tell your spouse you are leaving in person. You do not know what a man is capable of until he's about to lose everything. I've met dozens and dozens of domestic violence survivors. Like, I have picked them up on the side of the road from fleeing from abusive spouses. Just because a man has never shown any violent tendency does not mean he would not snap and kill you or injure you if he finds out you're leaving. Do not ever tell your partner, ever, in person, you are leaving them. Do not take that risk. You do not need a reason to leave. If you just don't want to be there, that's a good reason. There is no awful reason to get divorced. I mean, there is no reason under the sky that's wrong to get divorced. Even if a man is abandoning his wife for another woman, that man leaving his wife might be the best thing that ever happened to his wife. If someone does not want to be with you, the best thing they can do is to tell you and leave. Even if it's right before you get married. It's better to be left than to be hurt for decades. When you view marriage as sacred and as a symbol of Jesus and the church, you are creating a situation where women are less likely to leave because they don't want to mar the image of the gospel. And I'm pretty sure it's not the men that's going to be most likely to flee. Even though women do abuse men, it just really isn't going to happen to the severity men do to women. Anytime you add religious, sacred, divinal aspects to a secular, potentially dangerous scenario, you are making it less likely that a woman survives. Marriage is not sacred. Marriage is not a symbol of anything. Marriage, until very recently, wasn't even a symbol of love or commitment. It was an arrangement between two men. Marriage is not about love. Marriage is not about anything but securing financial resources. Marriage is a business. That's what marriage has always been, and that's what it will always be. You can make your marriage into anything you want, but real biblical marriage is when one man sells a woman to another man. That's the nativity story. Probably a 12-year-old girl was sold to a man in his 40s. That's the Christmas story. Just not the one with the BB gun. And biblical marriage is a nightmare. And if you somehow beat the odds to marry a man who does not abuse you, does not control you, does not make you wish you were dead or make you want to leave the marriage, that does not make the marriage you have a healthy one without a power imbalance. You just got lucky. You just won the lottery. Anytime a man or anyone has the final say in a relationship, that is a power imbalance. That's similar to a relationship between an employee and an employer. If somebody has the final say in anything, in a romantic sexual relationship, you're not equal. And when Christian men say that men and women have different roles, you cannot call them equal if the men won't do the women's job ever. If the men wouldn't immediately do the woman's job without feeling less of a man, the men and women are not equal. If a woman tries to do a man's job in a Baptist church, it would be like saying the F word in front of strangers. That would be the level of taboo. Saying a bad word in front of children. If a man were to do a woman's job in church, he would lose the respect of every man in the room. You cannot call men and women equal in a biblical marriage if the men won't do the woman's job without feeling persecuted. If a man can't do the job of the other equal partner, and when I say equal, I mean they fake it, because deep down they know that women aren't equal. Because when you won't do the other person's job without losing your social and spiritual authority, you're not equal. Men and women in church would be equal if men jumped at the chance to do the woman's job. But they don't, and they won't. Because no man will lower themselves to the level of doing a woman's job, which is being a wife and a mother, because they view women as inferior. It really is the relationship of a master and a slave. I don't know of any master that would do the job of a slave. And you can call them equal all you want, but if the slave can't be the master and the master won't become the slave, you're not equal. Interesting fact, in biblical marriage back in the day, you could be a wife and a slave at the same time. They call them concubines. And being wife material is not a compliment. I don't care what people believe. If a man calls you wife material, it is not a compliment. Wife material is a woman a man can get something from, have kids with, free domestic labor. Basically, you fit the mold of what a man would get validation from other men. Being wife material is being dehumanized. If you're wife material, he's trying to put you in a dehumanizing position. My worst nightmare is being a man's wife material. That means you're useful, you look good on his arm. It's not about you. It's about what he can get from other men by standing next to you. That's what the nuclear family is all about. The American dream is a man's sexual fantasy of having everything in public and everything in private. And by private, I mean going down, using the Grindr app. You cannot convince me biblical marriage isn't a gateway for domestic violence. Domestic violence can be as simple as a woman believing she doesn't have the spiritual capability or the intellectual superiority to make decisions like a man. Because if a woman doesn't see herself as equal with a man, with the proof, evidence, and consistency to back it up, a woman is less likely to leave. How can she leave? She believes she will be going to hell if she leaves. That's not a healthy relationship. That's some Epstein shit right there. Because if you leave, he will ruin your life. You will lose everything. Your friends, your social sphere, your spiritual connection. That is abuse. If you lose anything besides having the home you want to leave, you are creating a situation that keeps women from leaving. That's why marriage is not sacred. That is why marriage is nothing but a piece of paper. That doesn't make it less special, and it doesn't make it trivial. It's a piece of paper. Similar to getting a driver's license or getting a lease on an apartment. It's a piece of paper. It means something, but it shouldn't mean everything. And it should not control your life or determine the value you provide to other people. And it's sad that women live their whole lives believing their only value is intrinsically linked to what man they marry. This is where purity culture comes from. You may disagree, but it's a psychological fact. I've taken classes with sex therapists. They have told me, and I quote, "If you view a woman's value by what she does or doesn't do with her body, that is objectification. It shouldn't matter. The only thing you should care about is if the men or women she was with, was it consensual and was it legal? That's it. And was it safe? By safe, were people using protection? The only part of someone's sexual history that somebody has a right to ask is if you have any STIs. As long as you don't shame people, I would want to know if somebody has any infections, diseases, because that can change relationships. But it can be borderline creepy. The value people put on virginity in women is demoralizing. I really do not care what people's body counts are. I will never ask people. It's not my business. And if they chose to do something I wouldn't do, not because I don't think it's right, it's just not something I want to do right now, that's fine. I mean, I've made videos in the past describing certain things based on my background and religion. There's a lot of things I have not done, not because it's wrong. I just haven't had the opportunity or the emotional maturity. So, if you have survived any of these kind of scenarios, go to therapy. Trust me. You can be a virgin. You can be anything you want. You still go to sex therapy. If just to unlearn the toxic things purity culture taught you. Your value has nothing to do with what you do. And yeah, I've been in sex therapy for 3 years now. Unlearning the creepy, predatory, sexist, gross messaging that the secular, but 90% Baptist Christian fundamentalist views were heaped on me. I did not grow up in a sex-positive environment. By sex-positive, I mean we did not have positive, consistent conversations about medically, scientifically funded, factual education. The only things I learned about were condoms were bad, no sex until marriage, and you were dirty if you did anything that wasn't after marriage. So, not having positive conversations with adults can be just as damaging as having incorrect talks. And it really can be. Being taught nothing is just as dangerous as being taught nothing is just as dangerous as being taught the wrong things. And when you grow up in an environment that treats female sexuality like it doesn't exist, and that women don't have those feelings, that women don't pursue knowing about themselves, and that women showing even a tenth of interest and curiosity or pursuit that a boy does is considered shameful, unimaginable, and they'll deny it exists. When you grow up in an environment where most girls do not understand their bodies, they don't know what they need to know, they don't know what's wrong, and they're actually told that whatever they think is wrong is the opposite. Can you imagine being told that your gut is wrong? That if you're uncomfortable in a sexual situation, you don't have a right to listen to your gut. That women should never say no. That it's unnatural not to want to do it. And that if a woman wants to do it more than just a little, there's something wrong with you. I mean, the double standards of biblical marriage and even secular marriage is unbelievable. I grew up in an environment that treated sex like it was an idol. That you couldn't touch it, you couldn't talk about it, you could not admit you thought about it. It was very shameful, and that there was only one way to use it. And it was something you could not withhold. It was not something you could admit initiate. There were so many different correct ways of doing it, and they specified the incorrect ones. I think the most important thing any child, adult, anyone can learn about sex, the most important, is that sex doesn't do it for everybody. I think that is the most important thing. And some people would say, well, what about consent? I think the number one thing everyone should learn about sex is that it doesn't do it for everybody. Because if you actually believe that there are at least 1% of the population that does not want sex, doesn't want, or their desire is different than what cis Christian people think it is, that shakes the entire foundation of consent. Because consent is usually based off the false assumption everybody wants sex or everyone's going to do it. If you can rock that foundation, you can rock the misaligned consent. When you realize that not everyone wants sex at all, some want it more, less, or they want it in a way that is not acceptable according to Christian people. If you believe marriage does not necessarily include sex, desire, or anything that's just an assumption, that rocks everything else. The most important thing anyone can learn about sex and sexuality is that there are people out there that will not exercise sexuality at all. We call it celibacy. There are people that don't ever want to have relationships. They don't want to have sex ever. They're not celibate. They're one type of asexuality or aromantic. When you grasp the concept that not everybody wants to be a traditional husband-wife or wants what most married people are forced, expected, and pressured to conform to, it rocks everything, including concept of consent. The idea that you can withhold sex is utter ridiculousness. Sex is not a gift. It's not an expectation. It's not an entitlement. You don't deserve sex, period, unless the person wants to do it. It's pretty simple. Animals understand consent. Bugs understand consent. Men understand consent. They say they don't, so they can escape accountability. Everyone knows you don't touch other people without consent. It's pretty simple. But if you believe that not everyone even wants to deal with the concept of sexual consent due to it's not hard to understand. But I grew up 27 years in churches, and even when I left church believing that everybody, every wife, every husband wants sex, they don't. And I'm pretty sure that half the women in church who would choose to have sex, might actually enjoy it, won't do it because they've never had fun doing it. And yeah, you can kill a decent, normal sex drive of the 99% of people that want to do it by choosing the wrong partner, being in a marriage that's just boring, tedious, uneventful, or something that just doesn't give the woman anything. It's not always an insidious thing on the man's part or their partner's fault. If you grow up in a culture that really just doesn't put any emphasis on women's satisfaction or women's desires being anything but an inconvenience for men, you just probably won't prioritize women's feelings. For the most part, that's just the way it is in those situations. And it's really, really sad. I've been in sex therapy for 3 years to undo the terrible advice I was given by all kinds of people, religious and atheists. But I will say atheistic, humanist someone is, the less likely they believe in the patriarchal institutions. Because when you don't believe in God, that man is the center of God's creation, that men are better than women, you're less likely to uphold patriarchal institutions of abuse. You're more likely to call out abuse. That's what's going to happen. That's why I will always feel safer around humanists, agnostics, and atheists than I will around any religious man.